So you're there in Genesis chapter 40, 41. And so we're continuing on with Joseph's story. And this is where Joseph is exalted. So we've kind of gone through his tribulation, his trials and tribulations since he was thrown into the pit and then sold into Egypt. And so this is really where he gets out of it. And we'll see that he's 30 years old when this happens. He was 17 when he was thrown into the pit and when he was sold off to Egypt. So 13 years of just being a slave pretty much and then a prisoner. And so this is where God is exalting him and kind of coming out of that tribulation. So, but first off, we see that it's been 2 years since the butler and the baker were there in the prison with him. And so 2 years have passed since he told them their dreams, and the butler forgot about them, if you remember in chapter 40. But in verse 1 there it says, "And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years." So we know that's picking up after the butler and baker were, the one was given back his position, the other one was killed. But we see that Pharaoh has this dream. He has 2 dreams. It says that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. Behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them, and the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So what I believe happens here is that I believe this happened in one night, and pretty much what happens is he had a dream about the kine, and then he woke up, and then he fell back asleep, and then had another dream. Okay, it's the way, this is kind of how I'm reading. He wakes up, then he goes back to sleep and has this other dream. So I believe this happens in one night, because it's kind of like then Pharaoh dreamed, and it's just kind of talking about how he dreamed, but then it's like this course of through the night. He has a dream about the kine, and then goes back to sleep and has a dream about the ears of corn. Now, what's a kine? For those that are be like, what in the world are you talking about, kine? Kine is just another word for cows. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about cattle. We're talking about cows, pretty much. And so, and then obviously you know what ears of corn are. So I'm going to get into the dream a little later once we get to the interpretation of it, because there's some things I want to talk about with that. But first of all, what we see here is that he has his dream and it troubles him in the spirit. And there's a huge parallel from this and Nebuchadnezzar. If you think about it, Pharaoh is the king of pretty much the Babylon of that day. And then Nebuchadnezzar, obviously, he is the king of Babylon. So he's that head of gold. But if you remember the 7 head, the dragon with 7 heads, we were talking about how that's Egypt, Assyria, Babylon. And then it goes down the line with the Medo-Persian, Grecian, Roman, and then the last one, right? So, but all that to say is that there's huge parallels. So in verse 8 there you see, and it says, "And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof, and Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh." Now go to Daniel chapter 2, because I just want you to see just a very similar wording and everything that's going on here. Because Joseph and Daniel are like the two that are, Joseph's really known for dreams, but Daniel's known for dreams and visions. He had visions and all this other stuff that of end times prophecy. But Daniel chapter 2 and verse 1, it says, "And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him." Sound familiar? That's exactly what it said, what Pharaoh said, or what it said about Pharaoh. Notice verse 2, "And the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans for to show the king his dreams, So they came and stood before the king, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Now, if you know the story of Daniel, he couldn't remember the dream. He just remembered he had a dream, and it troubled him, and he couldn't even remember the dream. And that's where he gets mad at these magicians, because he says, you got to tell me what I dreamt. You know, like, what did I dream to begin with? And they're like, no one has ever done that, you know, is what they're saying. And that's obviously where Daniel comes in, and God reveals to him the dream. So in this case, at least Joseph is given the dream to begin with to give the interpretation. But you can definitely see the similarities there. And so once they couldn't do it. So in Genesis chapter 41 and verse 8, it says that, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. So all these magicians and wise men came to Pharaoh, and no one could interpret this dream. And so this is where the butler's like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. You know, I remember that guy that interpreted a dream. He's, you know, and so in verse 9 there is where he's kind of bringing to remembrance Joseph. Notice in verse 9 it says, Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream, and there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew servant, to the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was, me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. So what he's saying is that, hey, there was this young man back when I was put into prison, and also I was with the chief baker, and he's saying there's this young man that was there, and both me and the baker had a dream, each of us, in one night, and Joseph, this young man, interpreted it, and it came to pass. And so he's basically validating that, hey, this guy knows how to interpret dreams. And so Pharaoh is going to call for Joseph. Notice in verse 14. Verse 14. It says, Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. Now I kind of want to just show you, we've been kind of showing the parallels of Jesus, and I kind of just want to talk about this for a second. Go to Acts chapter 2, because and keep your finger there in Genesis 41, obviously. But notice that they brought him out of the dungeon. He shaved himself. He changed his raiment, and he came unto Pharaoh. Now, if you all remember, we were kind of talking about how Joseph obviously pictures Jesus. He was thrown into a pit without water to begin with, and then he was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Now, it's obviously not exactly like Jesus. Jesus was 30 pieces of silver. But he was sold into Egypt. Remember, out of Egypt have I called my son, it talks about with Jesus. And we saw all these parallels, even with the baker and the butler, with the fact that one was saved and one was killed, And then you have Joseph that's in the midst there that was innocent. And so you kind of see how he's numbered with the transgressors and all that stuff. So you definitely see that there's parallels here with Joseph. But I definitely believe that this is talking about pretty much the resurrection. Okay? How Jesus came up out of hell and out of the grave, and he has a resurrected body. There's your change of raiment. And now he's sitting at the right hand of the Father. What exactly happens in this chapter? You have Joseph sitting at the right hand of Pharaoh, and he's the second in command, and no one can say anything to him, and only Pharaoh's above him. So you can see this picture of Pharaoh and Joseph kind of picturing the Father and Jesus, and pretty much the Father bringing him out of, and we know that Jesus, it says, I have power to give my life, and I have power to take it again. And so we know that Jesus himself raised himself from the dead. We know that by the Spirit, he raised him from the dead, according to Romans chapter 8, but also the Father raised him from the dead. Now, we believe in the Trinity, so that it makes sense, right? That God, in essence, raised Christ from the dead. And so that's what I want to show you here, but I just want to show you that in Acts chapter 2, because I believe Acts chapter 2 really, we talk about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, And a lot of times it's more so just it's kind of said there, he died for our sins, was buried, and rose again. Third day, this really kind of touches on like what was going on in the death, burial, and resurrection. But in Acts chapter 2 and verse 22, it says, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God, among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know, him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken and by wicked hands have crucified and slain." Now, what's interesting about this is that his brethren, Joseph's brethren, is the ones that sold him off to slavery and they wanted to kill him. That's exactly what happened with Jesus. His own brethren wanted to kill him, and did actually. They actually slew him. But notice in verse 24, "Whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover also my flesh shall rest in hope, because thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Thou hast made known to me the ways of life. Thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance. Men and brethren, let me freely speak unto you of the patriarch David, that he is both dead and buried, and his sepulchre is with us unto this day. Therefore, being a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him, that of the fruit of his loins, according to the flesh, he would raise up Christ to sit on his throne, he, seeing this before, spake of the resurrection of Christ, that his soul was not left in hell, neither his flesh did see corruption. This Jesus hath God raised up, whereof we all are witnesses. Therefore being by the right hand of God exalted, and having received of the Father the promise of the Holy Ghost, he hath shed forth this, which ye now see and hear." So you can see exactly how this would parallel. He's in the dungeon. He was to begin with in the pit. Now obviously, these things parallel, but it's not perfect. It's not like he was in the pit for 3 days, or he was in the dungeon for 3 days, or anything like that. But you definitely see the correlation, how he was in the pit, then he was in the dungeon. Those are like the two portions of Joseph where he's at the lowest, right? He's in the pit, sold him off into Egypt. Then he actually had a pretty decent life where he was kind of head of the house of Potiphar's house, and then he was thrown into prison. So those two things, what I believe that's showing is basically two aspects of the same thing. When you think of hell, what do you think of? Well, you can think of the fact that it's a big burning fire, but you can also think about it being the bottomless pit, wherein is no water. So there's different aspects when you think about hell. It's darkness, outer darkness. You can think about all the different aspects of it. So when you think about being in a pit with no water, but also being in a dungeon and being chained up and basically not being able to leave. So that definitely applies. And obviously Jesus said, "I am the first and the last. I am he which liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen." And had the keys of hell and of death. So I believe this parallels perfectly with that. He had a change of raiment, and isn't that exactly what we're going to have at the resurrection? The change of raiment. We already have it spiritually, but we're waiting to be clothed upon with immortality. And so the clothing, the righteousness, the fine linen of the saints. And so Hebrews chapter 12, you don't have to turn there, but Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2, it says, "Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God." That's exactly what we see happening here with Joseph, is where he's being exalted to the right hand of the most powerful king in the whole world. And so that world power at the time. Now obviously we're talking about a physical realm with Pharaoh and Joseph, and I'm not saying Pharaoh was saved or anything like that, but you can definitely see the picture there. And we haven't even got to the point where he's being exalted. But he brings Joseph out, he shaves himself, he gets on new raiment, and so he's cleaned up, so to speak. It's basically he's done with the whole dungeon, being in tribulation and all that, and now it's time for him to rise. Now, in verse 15, it says, "And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it." So notice that Pharaoh is saying, "I know that you can do this. I've heard that you can do this." Notice Joseph's response. In verse 16, it says, "Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." So notice the humility and the fact that he's saying, "It's not me." And listen, he's already done it with the baker and the chief baker and the chief butler. But he's saying it's not me, it's God. And so he gives God the glory. That's exactly what Daniel does too. Because, Nebuchadnezzar, and even at the point, you got to understand that Daniel was he was ready to kill them all. He's like, I'm going to kill all the wise men, all the magicians, everybody. And basically in his haste, Daniel and his friends were going to be killed too. And that's why Daniel's like, hey, let me see if God will give me this dream. And so even knowing that the king's ready to kill you, Daniel says, it's not me, it's God, and gives God the glory. And so whenever you're in that type of situation, especially if you're coming out of tribulation and God's, kind of giving you that chance to get out of, that tribulation, remember to not, you went through a lot, right? And it takes a lot to go through that. But remember, it's God that got you through it. And in the end, God needs to get the glory. And never be trusting in our own flesh or basically trying to think that it's because we did it that we got out of it. So Joseph's going to give his interpretation here. And so I obviously we'll talk about this dream a little bit. So we've already read the dream a few times. So but I'm going to go straight to the interpretation in verse 25. It says, "And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. God has showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one, and the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there shall..." Now notice that this is where he's really explaining it. So he's basically saying, hey, all these 7s, they're all just representing 7 years. Okay? Notice that in verse 29, "Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass." Now, there's some things I want you to see with this is that it's doubled, and it represents the same thing, meaning that the kine and the corn, they're both representing the same event. But it's doubled. Now, why is it doubled? Because making a point like this is established, so nothing's going to change. It's going to happen. So anytime you see something doubled in the Bible, we talk about that with verses. Whenever you see a verse that's spoken twice, or let's say more than twice, it's in there like 4 times, then take note that that's something very important. It's not like God's just wanting to be repetitive. If it says the just shall live by faith, and it says that in Habakkuk, and then it says 3 times in the New Testament, guess what? That's an important verse. And just how about Abraham was justified by faith? That's mentioned 3 times in the New Testament, once in the Old Testament. That's something that's very important, or it wouldn't be mentioned that many times in the New Testament. And so notice that he's making a point that the dream was doubled. Now, another thing that I see with this too, and I'm just talking about like how you study doctrine, how you study more so the dark sayings, because sometimes people get way too nitpicky with parables or just dark sayings like that, where they're just like, what does it mean by corn? You see what I'm saying? And they'll say, well, the corn, was it candy corn? Was it blue corn? And they get too nitpicky with that vision or that dark saying. Whereas right here, it's not really about the fact. The only thing that really represents the kine and the corn is the fact that we're talking about food. Does that make sense? The kine, you're not going to have milk, and you're not going to have meat and all that stuff. And then the corn represents the fact that it's not only the meat, but it's also the veggies and all that stuff too. So obviously there is a representation there, but it's just getting the point across that, hey, you're going to have 7 years of plenty, and you have 7 years of famine. And so sometimes we get too nitpicky with that stuff. It's like, why was the horse pale? Why was the horse this or that? Now, I think it's important in the fact that sometimes the Bible will use that in other places. Does that make sense? Where it's like, okay, here's pale horses over here. That must be a correlation between these things as far as what's going on. I definitely agree with that, and you should look at that. But don't go too deep into like, what does red mean? Like, what's the significance of red? And you go that far deep, you're just getting down this rabbit hole. You're getting off the tracks. Okay. Whereas this dream, it's doubled because he's doubling it because he's saying, hey, listen, this is. He didn't say that, hey, I wanted to show you kine and corn because there's a difference between these two things. He's just saying, I doubled the dream because I want you to know this is established, it's going to happen, it's coming shortly. And so don't get too far into the weeds sometimes with the parable or the dark sayings. And I know I did a series where we were going through dark sayings. You always want to look at the big picture first. What is he trying to get across? Right? What's the big picture? You notice the big picture is 7 and 7. 7 good things, 7 bad things, right? That's the big picture. And that's what he's getting at when he interprets this dream. Is like 7 good years, 7 bad years, and the 7 bad years are so bad that you're going to forget about the first 7 years. Okay? And that's what he's trying to get across. And he doesn't really go into like, this is why it was corn, this is why it was kine. Now we can definitely infer like, hey, we're talking about cattle, we're talking about the crops, you know what I mean? And so there's that in there, but don't get too deep with it. And also, it also explains why did the ill-favored kine eat the other, and why did the blasted corn devour the good ears. It's basically stating that, you know, that famine that's coming after that, the plenteous isn't going to help it. Does that make sense? Like that. And it also shows you, too, that there was 7 good kine, and then after that there were 7 ill-favored. And it's showing that this isn't something that's parallel, meaning that this isn't happening at the same time. You had the 7 good ones, and then after that you had the 7 ill-favored. So he's showing that this is chronological. You know, when you're looking at the visions of Daniel, you know, that's one thing that when you get into end times prophecy, you get into all that stuff, is people sometimes will mistake things that are chronological, meaning that, like the statue, I think that's no doubt that's chronological. The head, then you have the arms, and then you have the legs, and then or the thighs, and then the legs, right? So that makes sense that that's chronological, that meaning that's happening throughout a period of time. But when you get to the 4 beasts in chapter 7, a lot of people think that's all happening at once. And so this kind of is showing you, hey, this has to happen chronologically. And so it's kind of giving you a way to understand that, and a way to when you see the interpretation, you can kind of almost look in there and be like, what wasn't important? You know, what wasn't that big of a deal? So then when you're looking at parables, knowing that every little thing isn't necessarily like the tipping point of how to understand it. Does that make sense? I'm not saying it's not important, because if I'm telling a story, if I'm obviously going to give you some details so you know what's going on, but there's something in the story that I'm trying to really get across. And if I mention something else, it doesn't mean that's a crucial part of the story. It just means that I'm trying to get you to understand what I'm talking about, okay? Anyway, I just want you to see that with the dream. It's pretty simple, obviously, when he explains it. We know what happens. And so notice Joseph's response to this, okay? So he tells him the dream, and then he's like, here's what you should do. So he not only has, you know, hey, here's a problem. We have a problem coming up, is that we're going to have 7 plenteous years, but then we're going to have these 7 years of famine after that. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be so bad that, you know, pretty much everything's going to die. So Joseph gives a solution here. And I want you to see his attitude. I want you to see what he does and doesn't do here. In Genesis chapter 41 and verse 33, it says, "Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, and the food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine." So he's got this good plan. It's basically saying, hey, we need to save 20% of the food each year, because the fifth is 20%, right? 20% of the food each year, and we're going to store it up for these 7 years of plenty. So it's not like it was 7 years of just a typical, right? We're talking 7 years of just luscious everything. It's just overflowing. You're never going to eat it all. You're never going to be able to use it all. And so he's saying we're going to store this up for those 7 years of famine. Now notice in verse 33 there, does he say, let Pharaoh appoint me? You know, and the reason I say this is because I was just reading through 2 Samuel, and I'm forgetting his name, Absalom. Absalom, how does it start off where he rebels? He says, would to God I were a judge in the land. Now, I may be misquoting that a little bit, but pretty much what he says is that, would to God I were a judge and I can answer you in these matters. He's basically, all these people are coming up with these problems, and he's saying, they don't have anybody set up to do this, but would to God I were a judge, because I would answer these matters. Is that how Joseph says that? He's like, you know, set me up, I'll fix your problem. No, he says, find out, or it says, look out, a man discreet and wise. So he's just saying, you need to find a good man, a wise, you know, man that's out there to do this work and to set officers under him. And so I see someone that's very humble, very modest. He's the one that even told them about this. So they're pretty much they should owe him everything in the fact that, hey, he's letting them know what's going to happen, and he's going to save their skins pretty much. But he's basically just saying, hey, you need to find someone wise and discreet that's going to be able to do this. And he's not self-exalting himself. And that's the way we need to be, is not just saying, you know, like you're at work or something like that. First of all, at work or if you're at your job, you need to first of all try to figure out the problem. That's the first step. But you ever know those people that just they scream about the problem, but they never have any solutions? All the liberal leftists that are out there, right? They're like, we have a problem with this and that. Here's the solution. You know, there's a problem, you know, that people, you know, are hungry or something like that. And it's like the solution is to steal all the money from everybody else and give it to them. It's like, that's a bad solution, first of all. But a lot of times they don't really even have a solution. They're like, guns, we need to get, you know, gun control, all this stuff. Well, what's your plan for gun control? Oh, I don't know. Besides gun confiscation, which they don't want to say. But all I'm saying is that a lot of times people, they have no problem telling you what the problems are, but they have no solution. They haven't thought out like, hey, here's actually how we can do it. Let's think out how we can do it. And, you know, that's the problem. And so we need to go into it saying, hey, I figured out the problem, but what's the solution? And I did a project, we were kind of doing this thing where someone said, okay, we have a problem with our infrastructure as far as the roads and like transportation in Morgantown. We're like, you know, what can fix the problem? And so that's, first of all, what you figure out is that there's a problem, right? Then they say, okay, here's what we do to fix the problem. How do you pay for it then? Do you see that there's a progression? You know, you don't just say, it's kind of like, my car is breaking down. Buy a new car. That's the solution, right? Someone will say, buy a new car. Well, how am I going to pay for it, right? That's the problem. You know, a lot of people are like, here's the solution. It's not practical. It's not something you can actually even do, right? And so, but go to Proverbs chapter 27, and we need to have this attitude where we're not praising ourselves. And Jesus had this attitude too. He wouldn't glorify himself. And he's actually rebuking them, saying, hey, if I glorified myself, you know, then he would be in sin. You know, you can't glorify yourself. That's just not the way it's supposed to work. And so we need to not try to lift ourselves up into a position. And that's something that Joseph did very well here, where he basically is just showing them who he is, but he's not saying, hey, you know, I could do this too. He didn't even say, like, find a wise and discreet man, you know, and if you want me to do it, I'll do it. He didn't even say that. And so in Proverbs 27, verse 2, notice what it says. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. So we see here that you ever see someone that just is constantly praising themselves? You're like, oh, I can do this. I'm good at this. and they're just constantly, and you look at them like they're an idiot, right? You're like, man, does he not know that makes him look really arrogant and stupid? And so what you want, though, is someone to say, hey, brother so-and-so, he's a great soul winner. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you said, I'm a fantastic soul winner, I'm just winning people left and right, I'm just a godly man. Do you see how it's almost hard to say, okay, to say that, and I'm being facetious, I'm being foolish, speaking foolishly, as Paul would say, right? So that's kind of over the top, be like, I'm the best pastor in America. Like, even if it were true, which is not, by the way, I'm sure, but even if that were true, that's very wrong. It's very prideful and very wrong to say, okay? It's kind of like Paul, he's saying, I'm the least to be called an apostle. But he labored more than them all, right? He was probably the chiefest among apostles, to be honest. But in his mind, he's saying, I wreaked havoc on the church. He's basically saying, I'm not even worthy to be called an apostle. But he labored more than them all, and then other people would praise him. Okay, so what you want is other people to praise him. And I'll say this too. If we need to be in a place too, especially for our brothers and sisters in Christ, where if someone is down on somebody, let's say I saw someone like kind of talking, like belittling someone, in the church setting or something like that, I'm going to make it a point to be like, let's say someone was saying something about Brother Charles or something like that. You'd be like, well, Brother Charles was out soul winning. He's one of the best soul winners we have. He's one of the most faithful soul winners we have at our church. Now, why am I doing that? Well, first of all, he deserves it. Second of all, I want other people to see him in the light that he needs to be seen. Does that make sense? But, knowing that we can't do that, you need to know that, hey, if we can't do that, then we should be trying to build up others. We should be trying to make others look, it's kind of like the referral, so to speak. That's the best thing. Going into an interview and being like, let me tell you why I want this job and why I need this job and why I'd be great for this job. That's always uncomfortable. It always feels weird. I hated that. And I only did it once for my main job, right? I never left after that. I just didn't want to do interviews, no. But that was always the hardest. They're like, tell me why you would be a good pick. And it's just this most uncomfortable, because it's self-praising, it's self-exalting. What you'd rather have is them call up somebody you worked with and them saying, like, hey, he's a good worker, he's always here on time, he does a great job, he's a great problem solver. You want someone else to say it, okay? But go to Proverbs chapter 25 as well. This is something that's mentioned in Proverbs 25, but it's also mentioned in the New Testament by Jesus. It's kind of like, I think about this with pastor friends of mine that have gone through persecution, especially like Pastor Jimenez and Pastor Anderson, where people are just like, oh, this person's an idiot, this person's, they're talking trash on them, and they're saying, this person is just hateful. That's the time you need to step in and say, listen, like Pastor Jimenez, they're like, oh, this guy's so hateful. I'm like, yeah, he's so hateful that when I went out in 2013, and I was going out and visiting his church, that they brought us all into their house. They fed us. I got sick while I was there, and they took care of me while I was sick when their children were in the house, while they were taking care of Joanne's grandmother. Yeah, they're really horrible people. And so that's the time where you step up and be like, listen, they're one of the nicest people I know. They'll give you the shirt off their back. And anybody that says any different, it doesn't know what they're talking about. Now, first of all, I believe they deserve that praise because they are good people and they were good to me. But in those times is where it really needs to step up. And if you remember, we did kind of a video back when that happened with the Orlando thing where we were all like saying, we stand with Verity. That's what I'm talking about. Right? When they're getting attacked, that's when you need to step up and say, what are you talking about? These are great people. That's a great man of God. And you need to step up and say, because Pastor Jimenez can't go up and say, I'm actually a good person, I never do, you know what I mean? Because he's going to look dumb doing that, first of all, even though it's true. And so we need to have that mindset that we're praising others. And I'm not saying to praise people that don't deserve it. You know what I mean? I'm not saying to be fake with it. But I'm saying people that deserve it, and especially when they're in a position where they're being downplayed and you know that they're better than what people are perceiving them as, that's when you need to step up and be like, that's a great man of God. You know, there's a faithful brother. And but Proverbs chapter 25 and verse 6, it says, "Put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the presence of great men. For better is it that it be said unto thee, Come up hither, than that thou shouldest be put lower in the presence of the prince whom thine eyes have seen." This is kind of what I see here with Joseph, is that, you know, he's standing in the presence of a bunch of great men. You know, the king of Egypt. He's standing in the presence of the king of Egypt, the highest man in all the land. And he's basically taking a back seat. He's just like, you know, you need to find somebody, you know, you brought me here, right? I'm not saying that you can't talk to these people. But what he's not doing is putting himself in the pack with them and standing with them. Does that make sense? He's not putting himself in the category with them. He's basically saying, I'm not worthy to even be standing up here. And then that's where he's exalted in the position. And go to Luke chapter 14, because this kind of applies in life in general when it comes to how what we think we're entitled to. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example. You know, just when I started the church, I was invited to preach at the post-tribulation conference, right? I don't believe I deserved that. I just started the church, right? Now, obviously, I've known them for a very long time. I was honored to do it. But here's where it would be foolish of me if I'd go there and think that I need the same amount of time as Pastor Anderson, or I deserve to be in that group. Does that make sense? It's different if I'm called upon and they say, hey, come up hither. You know, we need you up here. We need you to do this. It's another thing for me to say, I deserve to be with them and I deserve to be in that circle. Honestly, I was humbled. I was just like, I can't believe you even want me here right now. You know, like I haven't proved anything yet. And so, you know, all that to say is that that's the attitude you need to have, though, is the fact that, hey, I don't deserve this position. I don't deserve the attention. I don't deserve any of that, okay? And I don't think I don't believe I'll ever deserve that, okay? And so we need to have that kind of mentality that, hey, I'm not going to put myself in that group. I don't deserve to be in that group. But that doesn't mean other people will perceive me as being one of those men. Does that make sense? Because other people may say, you know, Pastor Robinson's one of the greats. That's fine if people perceive me like that, but I'm never going to look at myself like that. That's the difference. And I'm never going to exalt myself like I'm in that position. I'm going to have the attitude of Apostle Paul, even though he was one of the greatest apostles ever that we know of, right, according to the Bible. He viewed himself as the least. And he never tried to say, I'm the best apostle or anything like that. He's just basically saying, am I not an apostle? He's just basically saying, I am an apostle at least, right? But Luke chapter 14 and verse 8, it says, When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. And he that bade thee, and him come and say to thee, Give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, that when he that bade thee cometh, he may say unto thee, Friend, go up higher. Then shalt thou have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with thee. For whosoever exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. So you know this passage, he's trying to teach you about humbling yourself, and you'll be exalted. But if you try to exalt yourself, exaltation, I guess you would say, then you're going to be abased. You're going to be humbled. And, I think about this. You're at a wedding, right? Let's say you know the people there. Are you going to sit up there with the family immediately? Now, obviously, if you are the family, that's different, right? I'm not saying if it's like your daughter's wedding. I mean, obviously, you're going to be up in there. But let's say you're a friend of a certain family. You're going to the wedding. You don't just assert yourself up in the front. I personally am going to be like, give me the worst seat you got, let everybody else take the seats, just glad to be here. But let's say you get there and then your friend's like, hey, what in the world are you doing back here? I want you up with my family. Sit up here with my dad, or whatever. And you're like, it's like the groom. And you're like, sit up here, and they bring you forward. People are going to be like, who's this guy? That's getting all this attention. Does that make sense? That's where it's kind of coming in with the worship. It'd be kind of like if you went to a big event, let's say there was a big celebrity or something like that, and then they came up to you and said, hey, come up here. And everybody would be like, who's this guy? This person knows them and wants them to be sitting higher. And so all that to say is that just kind of a physical example that Jesus is giving with a wedding. But I remember, even at Justin's wedding, my younger brother, Stephen, came to the wedding, and he was sitting like in the back. And I remember this because I was like, I feel like I'm fulfilling something in the Bible here. Because I told him, I said, what are you doing sitting back here? Because Stephen's like close, he's pretty close in the family. And I said, you need to get up here and sit up with my uncle, my dad, And, but that's an example of that. But see, there's an example of him not thinking that, I should be up there. And expecting that. People that are entitled. Does that make sense? There's a lot of people out there that feel entitled to certain seats, to certain positions. And we need to get that out of our minds that we're not entitled to it. We earn it. And this is something that Joseph earns. He wasn't entitled to it. He didn't even give himself that position. But notice that he gives him this dream, and he says, you need to find a wise and discreet person. In Genesis chapter 41 and verse 37, it says, and the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all the servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? So notice that. Pharaoh's not blind. Not only does he see a man that's very wise and very discreet, he sees someone that wasn't trying to exalt himself, someone that's humble. And in verse 39 it says, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled, and only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Second in command. That's exactly what happened with Jesus, obviously. With Jesus, he's the second person of the Trinity. But, and we already discussed that with 1 Corinthians 15, where he's going to put all things under his feet, but it is known that he is accepted. It is manifest that he's accepted, which did put all things under his feet, because he's going to deliver it up to the Father. Okay? And so that's exactly what happens with Jesus and the Father. Same parallel. But we see here his attitude. And you may overread that sometimes when you're reading this, as far as how he went into this and how he was exalted. Kind of look at it. He's not standing before the great man. He's not comparing himself to them. And he's basically saying, you need to find somebody. The great men are over here. Find somebody that's wise and discreet. He's not numbering himself with them. But Pharaoh sees and says, you're wiser than them all. And before honor is humility. And you want to be considered wise, then you need to be humble. Anybody that isn't wise or prideful, they're not wise. Period. And anybody knows that when you run into somebody that thinks they know everything. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. With much knowledge is much sorrow. It talks about it in Ecclesiastes. Because the more you learn, the more you realize, I don't really know as much as I think I know. And so, if you want to be a wise and discreet person, you need to be humble. Now, 1 Peter chapter 5 and James chapter 4 cover this, talking about 1 Peter chapter 5 in verse 6. It says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting your care upon him, for he careth for you." In James chapter 4 and verse 10, pretty much the same thing that's being said. It says in verse 10 of James 4, "Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up." So Joseph went through 13 years of being humbled, and then he was exalted. Now, you'd say, man, that was a rough thing for him to go through. Yeah, well, look at the position he got, though. Is there anything better you can get besides being Pharaoh? I mean, that's the highest position he could have got besides overthrowing Pharaoh. And so, and he's basically saying, no one could even lift up hand or foot without thee. That's what he's saying. He's saying, you are ruler over Egypt. I'm the only one that's above you. The only one I'm sitting in the throne. And if you think about it with Potiphar, he was pretty much ruling that house, meaning that Joseph was ruling that house. Potiphar didn't even know what was going on besides what he was eating. And so it's kind of the same thing with Joseph, is basically Pharaoh's just kind of sitting back and right-hand man's doing it all. Does that make sense? And so, but going back to Genesis chapter 41, Pharaoh is going to give Joseph a wife and a new name. Bible trivia, by the way, and Brother Eric nailed it, by the way. The name for Joseph, at least this is the way Scorpy says it. Okay, so I know that's the right way. But Zaphnath Paaneah is his name. It's not as long as Meher Shalal Hashbaz. I was forgetting it for that. I was thinking of Bashamath for some reason. Meher Shalal Hashbaz, that's the longest name. But Zaphnath Paaneah is pretty long, okay? That's a pretty long name. So it says in verse 45, "And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Paaneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, and Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt." So he was 30 years old, so that's where we get the fact that he was put in. He was 17 years old when he was put into the pit, and then he was sold off into Egypt. So 13 years. We don't really know as much as far as how long he was with Potiphar or how long he was in the prison. We know he was at least in prison for 2 years, because 2 years went on since the butler left and didn't tell anything about Joseph. But another parallel with Jesus, go to Revelation chapter 3, because Pharaoh gives Joseph a new name and a wife. We'll actually see the same thing with Jesus, is that Jesus is going to get a new name, obviously God's new name, and then the Lamb has a wife. And so you can definitely see these correlations as far as being brought out of the dungeon, being exalted to the right hand of the king, and also getting a new name and getting a wife. And so in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 12, it says, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar." Now, Jesus is talking here, by the way. All this time when he says, "Unto the angel of the church of Ephesus," and all this, it's Jesus who's talking. And it says in verse 12, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name." Now, we don't know what that name is or anything like that, but we know that Jesus is going to have a new name. Now, in Revelation chapter 19, we see talking about his wife. There's actually two things, and actually it's very similar to what's being said in Revelation chapter 3, because it talks about the new city, New Jerusalem, but also this name. But we'll see that when we're talking about the wife, we're talking about the city as well, but more so the people of the city, right? When you say the city of Morgantown, you could be talking about the people and not the actual buildings and roads and all that. And so in Revelation chapter 19 and verse 6, it says, "And I heard as it were the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of many thunderings, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. Let us be glad and rejoice, and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of saints. So who's the white? The saints, those that are saved. We saw, I mean, if you go to Ephesians, it talks about that he may present the church as a chaste virgin to Christ and all that. So obviously we're talking about believers with Christ. In Revelation chapter 21, in verse 9, we see the wife being brought up again. And verse 9 of chapter 21, it says, And there came unto me one of the seven angels which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. So, again, I just wanted you to see that. I think most people already knew that, right? That he has a new name, and he's going to have a new name, and then that's going to be written on our foreheads. But then also the fact that his wife, which is going to be all the saved. Okay. Now all that's symbolistic, right? It's not, it also talks about how we're his brethren. Okay. So again, when you're dealing with these things, don't take them too far. Okay. We're talking spiritually speaking that we're, New Jerusalem, and we're his wife, but we're also his brethren. Okay. So don't take those things too far. It's just showing the relationship, right? But we're also the sons of God. So all those things are showing types of relationship. Son is subject unto the father. The wife is subject unto the husband. You can see those correlations and how all that stuff fits. It's just kind of showing you our relationship with God. Okay? But you don't take those things too far. But back in Genesis chapter 41, we'll finish up here. And really what I'm going to get into next here, kind of ending off this chapter, is something that I'm going to get into a little more when we get into chapter 47, I believe, dealing with what Joseph does when the famine comes in. Okay, I do believe, personally, I believe there's something that he does that's not right with this. But I want you to see what's going on here. So in verse 47 it says, And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls, and he gathered up all the food of 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons, before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, For God, said he, had made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, For God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. So notice that this famine is throughout all the lands. This isn't just Egypt. But what happens here is that he takes the 5th part of the Egyptians' food that comes in with the crops, and he stores that up. That's 20% every single year. He stores it up. Look at it as a tax. The way I look at this is like a 20% tax that the government is taking. What happens when the famine comes? Does he just give it back to them? He sells it to them. He's actually going to sell all the Egyptians into bondage, is what we'll see. Now, that's another sermon for another day. But this is the start of something that I believe is not right, that's being done by Joseph, by someone that's in power. Now, I'm not against them selling it to other nations because they didn't do anything for it. That's different. But we have a government that takes all our money, and then they charge us for it, And so, imagine someone taking you taking your car, and then saying, "Hey, you can buy it back from me. You stole it from me. You took it from me, and now I'm buying it back from you." Does that make sense? And so that's how taxation works, okay? And this is a good representation of how taxation is theft, okay? Now, it'd be one thing if he took it and said, "Hey, this is all yours. I'm just keeping it in store, so when this comes out, you'll have your store left," okay? And that's not what happens, though. He sells it back to them. And it starts off fine. Everybody's just kind of buying it and doing that, and then it goes off into complete bondage, which is exactly what every civilization does when it comes to taxation. And so that's for another sermon for another day. We'll get there eventually. But we first got to get through all the stories with his brothers coming back and that, reconciling with his brothers. But I want you to see kind of the pitfall that starts that off, okay? And so, and honestly, I think that might be the pitfall that started off the children of Israel being in bondage too. I mean, you think about all that kind of going into Joseph and how he was selling. He basically sold everybody into slavery, into bondage. And so Joseph's not perfect, by the way. Now, he's obviously a great man here, but listen, power corrupts. And even the best person that's in a position of authority and that kind of power corrupts people. That's why no one should ever be in a position of power for a long period of time like that. And God never meant it to be that way. He didn't mean it to be a monarchy with kings. And that's why we're supposed to have term limits on stuff and, with the president and all that other stuff. Why? Because if someone gets in there, it just becomes a dictatorship. And so, anyway, political sermon for another day. So let's end with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this evening. I pray that you be with us as we go back home. I pray that you be with all those that aren't feeling well. And Lord, just thank you for this passage. There's so much stuff that we can learn from it. And Lord, the book of Genesis is just packed with all kinds of interesting stories, but also just life lessons that we can learn from. And Lord, just pray that you'd help us to be edified from it and Lord, to use it. And Lord, to be with us throughout the rest of this work week. And Lord, we love you and pray all in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.